You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to dig a little deeper into the race for Utah's 2nd Congressional District with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have Peter Kroon and Rick Larson. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Let's dig right into this race. Representative Stewart, an incumbent, going for a 4th term. Rick, let's start with you. What has he done to show voters in his district, yeah, I may want to stick with this guy?
I think the most important thing he's done is he's been consistent. He's got a couple of good posts on intel and appropriations. He's been holding town meetings when a lot of officials have decided not to. It's a little too hot, but he's still getting in front of his constituents. I know there's a name recognition argument, but I think he's known among the people who need to know him. So I think he's proven to be a very consistent, reliable, conservative candidate.
Let's, before we bring you in, Peter, I want to hit on one thing there, the town halls. They're effective even though they don't appear to really get much accomplished, just for the fact that he's willing to stand up in front of a crowd and take that on?
I think representatives are getting points for showing up. I think it's almost turned into a little bit of a game if you can drive him out of the arena. So I do think there's value in him continuing to stand in front of his constituents.
Okay, Peter, let's bring you in. Shireen Gorbani, the Democratic nominee, trying to unseat an incumbent, which is always an uphill challenge to begin with. But make an argument for her. Why should voters look at her and say, you know what, maybe we do need a change in this district?
Well, first of all, I've sat down with her. She's an eloquent woman, very pragmatic. If you look at her policy statements online, you'll see that she's really just a common sense person. She's got a wonderful history, and I think she's going to do well in this race. And you know, it's time to get a Democrat in office. Not having a Democrat representing the state of Utah in office, I think, is a bad thing for this state. And so I think Shireen Gorbani would be a great candidate and a representative for the state of Utah.
When you say you think she's going to do well in this race, define what doing well in this race would mean.
Well, of course, winning is always what we want to see. 50% plus one right. is.
But in that district, Democrats have struggled to get out of the 20th percentile in the voting.
It is tough, and I think we're going to see this year, I wouldn't call it necessarily a blue wave, but I think we're going to see a lot of Democrats getting out, especially because of the ballot initiatives that are on the ballot this year in the state of Utah.
That brings us into something I wanted to talk about. We'll get to the blue wave more in just a minute, but let's talk about the ballot initiatives. 3 for sure on the ballot, possibly a 4th. What kind of an impact could that potentially have on a race like this in Utah's 2nd Congressional District?
I think the math tells a story. In that district, the numbers break down this way: 44% Republican, 14% Democrat, 37% undecided. If these initiatives draw the undecided voter, that could have an impact.
How so?
Those are voters who are not ideologically locked. Something as specific as medical marijuana, the way it's been communicated, and I think, you know, we're not advocates of the medical marijuana initiative the way it's written. We are advocates of medical marijuana, but that's the kind of issue that could get an unaffiliated or an undecided voter to show up where normally they wouldn't, and that's where that strong 44-17 ratio could break.
Okay, let's bring you in for some thoughts on that. How could initiatives potentially play a role in this?
And I think all these initiatives are initiatives that Democrats support. So Medicaid expansion, better boundaries, changing the boundaries to stop gerrymandering, the medical marijuana initiative as well. I think these are all things that Democrats strongly support, so that I think that will drive them to the ballot. And you know, obviously Republicans may not be so excited about getting out and voting this year based on who our president is, and you know, I think the incumbent doesn't necessarily draw a lot of excitement, so people just may stay home on the Republican side. That's our, you know, best case scenario as Democrats.
Are these just Democratic ballot initiatives, though? Because if you take a look at the polls, a majority of Utahns are favoring both of them at this point. So that would indicate that Republicans are behind them too, no?
Well, I think, at least in the case of one of them, the language used is appealing to a lot of voters. Again, I don't mean to get off on medical marijuana too much, but if the question is, do you support, are you compassionate? Do you think if it helps people suffering from pain, should they be able to have it? The answer is yes. I would answer yes to that question. But we're hopeful that there will be an education process and a little more substantive look at the legislative side of what's being proposed as medical marijuana. But yes, the way it's presented, it crosses boundaries.
So when you talk about the unaffiliated or the undecideds, are those more likely to lean Democratic or Republican?
I think unaffiliated voters tend to lean Democrat, although there are a lot of people who don't register in Utah for a political party, and so it could go both ways. But I think unaffiliateds this year, I think, will lean Democrat.
Your thoughts on that, Rick?
The data says, I always like to look at numbers when you're just trying to make sense of it all. A third of that 37% in District 2 tend to lean Democrat or progressive. So there's still wiggle room, but it still says the majority of people in that district lean conservative.
Okay, let's move on to something you brought up, the blue wave. People are talking about it across the country. Are we going to see an impact here in the state of Utah?
Well, I don't know how big a wave it's going to be, but I think we'll definitely see some numbers changing towards Democrats this year, unaffiliated, as we talked about. And I think people are coming out for the ballot initiatives. I think Democrats are excited this year. There's a strong sentiment from Democrats that we need to do something to stop this tidal wave of bad policies, bad initiatives coming, especially out of our federal government.
How do you see that playing out here in our state?
Hard to rely on polls because issues that are divisive, let's get beyond passion, that cause rage, can take you one of two ways. I'm angry, I'm not showing up. I'm angry, I'm showing up. We simply can't know. I think we learned a lot from 16 about trusting the polls. And I think if there ever were a year for voters to show up and vote on what they care about, this would be it. It remains to be seen if they will.
And I think the Democrats are very anti-Trump, and I think there's a lot of Republicans who maybe aren't supportive of Trump. And so I think that alone, that name alone, gathers a lot of anger from Democrats, and so I think they're going to come out and say it's time for us to stand up and do something.
Even if all these things came together in Gorbani's favor, let's not kid ourselves. This is still a very red district. So could a perfect storm happen in favor of the Democrats in this situation?
It can always happen. I'm a perfect example of winning a race as the Salt Lake County mayor that I was never expected to win. So you got to be in it to win it. And I think Shireen Gorbani is a great candidate. If we're going to have a perfect storm, she could be the victor in this race.
Your thoughts on that, the makeup of this district and leaning red?
Well, listen, I like that she's running. I think she's a compelling candidate. She's educated. She's got a great story. Obviously, she's passionate. Running for office requires passion. I don't think the math is in her favor, but you've always got that variable of who shows up. I don't think either party, and especially given the divisions within both parties, should take anything for granted in this midterm.
Okay. One quick, we just have a little bit of time left, but Mitt Romney, a very popular Republican, will be at the top of this ticket. How could that impact it? We have about 30 seconds left, so we'll go 15 seconds each.
See, there again, I worry a little bit. Does a candidate of that stature make people comfortable and apathetic? It should make them comfortable and engaged. So if it accomplishes that, it's a big lift.
Okay. Peter?
And I think a lot of people see Mitt Romney as the victor, although we've got a great candidate in Jenny Wilson. So I think Republicans may stay home in this race, even though everybody likes Mitt Romney. It seems like he's just a person that doesn't have a lot of natural enemies, but may not have a lot of people driving to the polls just to vote for him.
Have to end it on that note, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank
Stay
you.
with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.